One winter, I decided to spend a few quiet days at my family's old cabin deep in the Canadian wilderness. I figured it'd be the perfect way to clear my head, but on the first morning, I opened the door and saw footprints in the snow leading straight up to my cabin. The place was a small, family-run lodge, nothing extravagant, just a modest wooden cabin that my grandparents had built years ago. Over time, it became the go-to retreat for anyone in the family looking to escape the grind for a bit. I had planned this trip right after New Year's, figuring 3 nights off-grid would be just what I needed. The cabin sat in a remote part of the woods, so remote that I had to ride a snowmobile several miles just to reach it, pretty standard for this time of year. As soon as I arrived, I got the wood stove going, dropped my stuff in the bedroom, and settled in. Within half an hour, I was already feeling that calm I'd been craving. Time moved differently out there, slower, quieter. My mind could finally breathe. That first day and night passed peacefully. I slept like a log and woke up at sunrise, fixing breakfast right on top of the wood stove like my grandpa used to. After eating, I threw on my coat and headed outside to fetch more firewood. But the second I opened the front door, I froze. There were footprints. They came right up to the cabin, fresh ones in the snow, leading in from the woods. I stepped outside, heart already racing, and scanned the area. Then, curious and uneasy, I began following the tracks. They didn't lead toward the road, not even close. In fact, they vanished into the thick woods, miles away from the nearest trail or house. No signs of a snowmobile, which didn't make sense. Who would hike out here on foot, especially in the middle of the night? I would have heard something that morning if they'd been close. Still feeling on edge, I grabbed the firewood from the shed and headed back inside. I seriously considered leaving right then and there. But nothing had happened, and whoever it was hadn't tried anything. Maybe it was just some random hiker who got lost? Besides, packing up and heading back down would be a huge ordeal, and I didn't want to bail on the trip over something that might have been nothing. So I sat near the fire, trying to shake off the nerves, keeping an eye on the woods through the window. Nothing else happened for hours. By the time the sun was high in the sky and the cabin warmed up, I decided I'd take a walk. I was still curious. Maybe I could follow those tracks and figure out where they came from. It'd help settle my mind. So I bundled up and headed into the trees, retracing the same footprints I'd seen earlier. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, weaving through the dense forest. No other cabins, no paths, just trees and snow, and that single, continuous trail of prints. Then I heard it. A crunch in the snow. I instantly snapped my head up and stared ahead. The forest went dead silent. Not a bird, not a breeze, just rows of trees standing still like statues. But I knew that sound. It was the unmistakable snap of someone stepping on frozen snow. My skin went cold, and the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. Someone was out there, close. Maybe just 10 or 15 feet ahead, hiding behind one of those trees. They must have spotted me and ducked out of view. I called out, "Hello? Anyone out there?" No answer. Not a sound. The silence was deafening. Panic started to settle in my chest. I didn't want to wait and find out what their plan was. I turned and made a beeline back to the cabin, practically running the whole way. Once I got back, I tossed my stuff together in a rush, locked everything up tight, and hopped on the snowmobile without looking back. That person, whoever they were, had been close to the cabin the night before. And the fact that they were still hanging around during the day? That wasn't random. That was deliberate. I never returned to that cabin. Fast forward a year. It's the end of February, and as usual, my buddy Mason and I decided to do our annual winter camping trip. We've both done plenty of backpacking, but there's just something special about camping out in a snowy forest. Peaceful, isolated, and with the right gear, totally doable. We got there, pitched our tents, got a fire going, and cracked a couple beers. Just your typical laid-back start to a camping trip. But not long after we'd settled in, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the stillness. It echoed through the trees, sharp and distant, like it came from miles away. Then it stopped, gone in seconds, replaced by silence. We both jolted to our feet, hearts racing, scanning the tree line. It sounded too far off to spot anyone, but we stared into the woods anyway. Mason shook his head and said it must have been some animal. Maybe a fox or a lynx making some weird, human-sounding cry. No way it was a person, not way out here. I wasn't so sure. It sounded like a person. But what could we do? There was nothing to go on, so we sat back down and waited, hoping it was a one-time thing. For a while, things stayed quiet. The sun started to dip behind the trees, and the cold crept in. We tossed a few more logs onto the fire and started cooking dinner. And then it happened again. That same scream, only this time, it was closer. Maybe 200 feet from camp max. Mason and I exchanged a look. We both knew we had to check it out before it got too dark. I grabbed my knife, just in case, and we threw on our coats and stepped into the woods. We moved carefully through the snow, trying to stay quiet. Neither of us said a word, not because we didn't want to talk, but because we didn't know what we might be walking into. Maybe 150 feet from camp, we heard it again, the same guttural scream, only this time it was right next to us. I froze, eyes darting around. The forest was still. Nothing moved. No shapes, no signs, just trees and shadows. I looked at Mason, and the worry on his face told me he was just as rattled as I was. We stood there in absolute silence, barely breathing, for what felt like 5 full minutes. Finally, Mason inched forward, slowly weaving between the trees. He stopped again just a few steps ahead, and I instantly sensed a shift in him, like his whole body tensed up at once. I stepped forward to join him, and almost lost my dinner. Lying there in the snow was the mangled body of a deer. Its neck had been snapped, and there was fresh blood still glistening in the pale light. It hadn't been dead long, maybe minutes. As I was trying to process what I was looking at, Mason reached over and tapped me on the shoulder. I looked up in the direction he was facing, and my stomach dropped. Across the woods, maybe 30 yards out, was a man. He was just standing there. No jacket, no hat, barely dressed for the cold. He wasn't moving or saying anything, just silently watching us. It wasn't curiosity in his eyes, it was like he was studying us, trying to decide something. Mason tapped my shoulder again, more urgently this time, and I didn't need him to explain. We turned and booked it back to camp without a single word. We packed up fast, too fast, honestly, but we didn't care. We just wanted to get out of there. To this day, I can't explain what we saw, or who that guy was, or whether he was the one screaming. Maybe it was all connected. Maybe not. But we never went back to that campsite again. We picked a new spot the next year and didn't talk much about that night afterward. A couple days before Christmas, I was out doing DoorDash deliveries late at night. I figured people would be generous with tips before the holiday, but one order led me somewhere I never should have gone. It was around 11 p.m. when I accepted a delivery. Simple enough, just a bag of food, drop it at the door. Most of my earlier deliveries had been groceries, probably since stores were closing up early for the holiday. This one was different though. It was way farther out than I usually go. Normally, I would have declined it, but it was a slow night and I needed the cash. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air as I drove, and the streets were mostly empty, making for a peaceful ride. But when I got close to the destination, I realized this wasn't a normal neighborhood. Instead of houses and streetlights, I found myself turning onto a narrow road that twisted through the trees. At the end of the path sat a small, old-looking cabin, like something from a postcard. I pulled in, parked, and grabbed the food. As I walked up to the porch, I could hear voices inside, not just one or two, but a lot. Laughter, chatter, people talking over each other. It sounded like a full-blown holiday party. That's what threw me off. How could that many people fit into a place that small? And something about the sound, it felt off, like it didn't match the space it was coming from. Too loud. Too artificial. Then the door opened. A man stood there, smiling politely. But inside the cabin was quiet. Still. Most of the lights were off, and nobody was moving around. The loud party noise still came from a small room at the back, echoing like it was happening in a different building entirely. "You can bring it in," the man said cheerfully. "They'll be happy to see you." The way he said it instantly put me on edge. I tried to stammer out an excuse, something about being in a hurry, needing to hit the next delivery, but he cut me off. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays," he said, grinning. "You'll be glad you stopped by." Even as he talked, the voices from the back room kept going, laughing, yelling, like a party was in full swing. But then, without warning, it all stopped. Silence. The man turned his head toward the back, clearly surprised. That was my cue. I dropped the bag right there on the porch and backed away fast. I didn't look back as I jumped into my car and sped off. I didn't work the rest of the night. I didn't even open the app again until after the holidays. Nothing happened exactly, but the way it all unfolded, the sounds, the strange man, the eerie shift in atmosphere, it stuck with me. Still does. The day after Christmas, I clocked in for a slow overnight shift at the family-run grocery store where I worked. The place was dead quiet, until I spotted someone outside, and things took a turn I wasn't ready for. I was scheduled for an overnight shift, even though the store had been closed for the holiday. There wasn't much to do, the shelves were mostly stocked, and it had clearly been a slow day. After about an hour of light work, I found myself just wandering the aisles. When I passed near the front windows, I noticed someone outside, a man, standing unusually close to the building. At first, I figured he was just walking by. But as soon as he saw me looking, he stepped even closer to the glass. He didn't wave, didn't knock, didn't say a word. Just stared. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I kept eye contact for a few seconds, hoping he'd move along or at least react somehow. But he just stood there, unmoving, watching me like I was on display. Trying to play it cool, I turned away and walked back toward the stockroom, pretending I wasn't bothered. But inside, I felt something tighten in my chest. There was something off about him. The way he just stood there, staring through the glass, not moving, not blinking. No normal person acts like that. I didn't know what to do, so I stepped away, hoping he'd lose interest and move on. A few minutes later, I cautiously made my way back to the front of the store and peeked out the window. He was gone. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I was holding. Maybe he really had just been some random weirdo passing by. I tried to brush it off and went back to wandering the aisles, straightening up some of the shelves just to keep myself busy. About 10 minutes passed. I turned the corner at the end of one of the aisles, and stopped dead in my tracks. Boxes were scattered all over the floor. And not just little snack boxes. These were the bigger ones, the kind that sit sturdy unless someone physically knocks them over. My gut twisted. There's no way those just fell on their own. As I tried to make sense of it, a sound crept out from the far end of the aisle. A low, weird laugh. It wasn't loud, just soft enough to feel like it wasn't meant to be heard. It sounded like a man giggling, but in this disturbing, childlike way, almost like he was playing with me. Every part of me screamed to run, but a dumb part of me also thought about confronting him. Then I remembered that guy from earlier, tall, heavy coat, maybe something tucked inside it. That thought hit me hard. I turned and bolted. I didn't stop until I was outside, diving into my car and slamming the door shut. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called the cops. They showed up about 10 minutes later. By the time we went back inside, the man was nowhere to be found. But he had been there. Security footage showed him sneaking in through a side door, one of the ones staff rarely used. And there he was, crouched behind an aisle, watching me from a few feet away. In his hand? A knife. Just a small switchblade, but enough to do serious damage. The cops figured he was high or drunk. I mean, maybe he was. But does that even matter? He followed me inside, snuck around, laughed at me, and had a knife. If I'd gone to check those boxes. I don't even want to finish that thought. It was New Year's Eve, and I wasn't really in the mood to party. but peer pressure and a free ride convinced me to go. I thought the worst thing I'd face that night was a hangover. Instead, I climbed into the wrong car and nearly didn't make it home. I've never been big on parties, but on nights like New Year's, I usually caved. This year, my buddy was hosting one at his place. Big house, lots of land, the works. He was kind of the rich friend in the group. Trav picked me up around 9, and we showed up to find about 30 people already there. Nothing crazy, just enough drinking and noise to call it a party. We played some games, watched the ball drop, took shots. It was actually a good time. By 3 a.m. though, I was done. I just wanted to crash. Problem was, Trav had passed out upstairs, and I didn't trust anyone else to drive. So I slipped outside, pulled out my phone, and ordered an Uber. It said 10 minutes away, so I found a spot on the curb, curled up in my jacket, and waited. His house was pretty isolated, no big roads nearby, just quiet space and trees. I remember closing my eyes for what felt like a minute or two, when a car rolled up. "Uber?" the driver called out. Startled, I stood up and climbed in. I must have been more out of it than I realized. Time passed weirdly. I got in the back seat and buckled up. The guy looked to be in his 50s, short dark hair, thick beard, heavy jacket. "Big party tonight?" he asked with a glance in the mirror. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, not really in the mood to talk. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. And for some reason that look, it sent a weird chill through me. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Too many drinks. So I leaned my head back and shut my eyes. Then, ding, my phone went off. I opened my eyes, looked at my phone, and froze. It was a message from the Uber app. "Your driver has arrived." Followed by another message from the actual driver asking, "Hey, where are you?" I looked up at the mirror again. The man was staring at me. Eyes locked. My heart sank. I casually slipped the phone back into my pocket and leaned back again, trying to stay calm. My brain was screaming, but I didn't want to tip him off. About 30 seconds later, we rolled up to a red light. I didn't wait. I threw the door open and jumped out, hitting the pavement hard as the car suddenly jerked forward, like he was trying to stop me from escaping. But I got up and ran. Fast. I didn't look back. I didn't care where I was. I just kept running until I felt safe. He drove off into the night. I never found out who he was. Never got a plate. But I've told that story to every single one of my friends, especially the ones who go out drinking. He was out there that night, driving around, pretending to be rideshare drivers, picking up drunk people who weren't checking their phones. I was lucky. I was drunk, distracted, and stupid. And I still almost didn't make it home. It started on Saturday. Midday, nothing unusual, until I heard a dull thud from the second floor. Just one, not especially loud, but strange enough that I got up to check it out. I walked upstairs, gave everything a once-over, the hallway, bedrooms, even the attic door. Nothing seemed out of place. No reason to worry. I shrugged it off and went about my day. Later that night, I was on the couch, nearly asleep, when I heard it again, that same low thump. Same spot. Same sound. Curious more than anything, I headed upstairs again. Still nothing. I even opened the door to the spare bedroom, which was completely empty. Clean and used. I looked around, saw no signs of anything. Maybe something had shifted or fallen. Maybe an animal outside. I went to bed not long after, not giving it much thought. The next morning, I headed down to make breakfast like usual. But as I moved through the kitchen and pantry, something felt wrong. The cereal boxes, the chip bags, little things, they weren't where I remembered them. I mean, I hadn't memorized their positions, but it felt off. Like things had been touched, or rearranged slightly. Subtle, but enough to get under my skin. I told myself I was being paranoid, maybe just imagining it. I tried to be more aware for the rest of the morning, but as the day wore on, I forgot about it. I watched TV, did some chores, and started to unwind. Right after sunset I heard it again, that same thud. This time, I stood up immediately and moved toward the stairs. But just before I climbed them, I heard something new. A click. It was faint, but distinct. Like a door latch or lock. I reached the top of the stairs, heart already picking up pace. I checked my bedroom, nothing out of place. Then I moved to the spare bedroom again, figuring I'd double-check. When I grabbed the handle and turned it, it only moved halfway. It was locked. From the inside. My blood ran cold. Panic hit me like a brick. I stumbled back a few steps, legs suddenly weak, chest tight. But then, I heard movement. Inside that room. Someone, or something, was stepping toward the door. No more thinking. I bolted down the stairs, heart pounding in my throat. As I hit the front door, I heard another click. Then the sound of the spare bedroom door creaking open behind me. I didn't look back. I ran all the way down the street before I finally stopped to call 911. When the cops searched the house, they didn't find anyone inside. But in the closet of that spare bedroom, they discovered something. Grocery bags. A blanket. Someone had been living in there. Quietly. Secretly. Likely sneaking around at night while I was asleep, eating my food, moving around my home. That thought alone still gives me chills. I haven't seen or heard anything since that night, so I assume they left for good. But I still wonder, what if I had opened that door? What if they hadn't left? I don't want to know the answer. One snowy night, I stayed home while a blizzard raged outside. The storm was supposed to keep everyone off the streets, but someone came to my door and didn't knock. The wind was brutal, the snow was thick, and I had no plans of going anywhere. I had the TV playing one of my comfort shows and was drifting off on the couch when I heard it. Heavy boots on the porch. The steps were loud enough to snap me awake. I stared at the door, expecting a knock. But there wasn't one. Whoever it was just stood there. Then, 2 more steps. And silence. It sounded like they'd stepped off the porch and into the snow. No more footsteps. Just quiet. I got up and walked to the window, confused. The storm outside was worse than I thought. Visibility was maybe a few feet at best, everything else swallowed in white. Still, I could barely make out fresh footprints on the porch, leading away. Why would someone be out in this? And why stop at my door only to walk away? I checked the other windows, just to be sure they hadn't circled around. Nothing. No more prints. No movement in the snow. Eventually, I went back to the couch. It was weird, but I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were just lost. Maybe it was a neighbor checking on something. Who knew? An hour passed. Nothing else happened. The snowstorm rumbled softly outside, and the low volume of the TV lulled me back to sleep. Next time I opened my eyes, everything was dark. The screensaver on the TV said it was 3 a.m. The storm was still going strong, but it was louder now. Too loud. And not muffled by the windows. As my mind caught up, I realized the sound I was hearing wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. Crisp. Close. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding. As I slowly sat up and listened, I reached over and flipped on the lamp. That's when I noticed the water spots, puddles all across the floor, leading straight to the front door. Snow was being swept in by the wind, piling up just past the entryway. The door was wide open. My heart dropped. I slowly got up and walked over. There were boot prints in the melted snow, clear as day, coming in and out of the house. I could kind of make out another set leading away into the storm, but I wasn't entirely sure. Panicked, I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom. I called 911, my hands shaking. By the time police got there, the house was empty again. Whoever had broken in was already gone. They didn't take anything. They didn't trash the place. It looked like they came in, searched for something specific, and then left when they didn't find it. But the worst part? I had been asleep on the couch the entire time. They either didn't notice me, or did notice and decided to quietly look around anyway. I still don't know which is worse. Ever since that night, sleep hasn't come easy. Every creak, every gust of wind, jolts me awake. I lie there staring into the dark, wondering how close they got. How long they were inside. What they were really looking for. When I was a kid, having the house to myself during school break felt like the ultimate freedom. But one Tuesday before Christmas, a knock at the door turned into something much more disturbing. It was the first morning of winter break. My parents left for work around 9 a.m., and the moment the garage door closed, I raced upstairs to fire up my PC. Gaming all day? Perfect plan. But not even 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I froze. Being home alone, I wasn't about to answer it. I wasn't even supposed to, honestly. So I muted everything and waited, staying quiet. No more knocks came. After a while, I figured whoever it was had left, so I went right back to my game. Time flew. I played for hours, completely zoned out. It wasn't until I got hungry that I finally took a break. I wandered downstairs, poured myself a bowl of cereal, and as I passed the front door, I noticed something odd. It was unlocked. That was strange. My parents were religious about locking it, and they'd left through the garage anyway. I shrugged it off and pushed the lock down, then headed back upstairs. It was early afternoon, maybe around 1:30. I sat back at my desk and reloaded into a match. Just a few minutes later, I felt my desk vibrate slightly. No sound, just a subtle shake. I took off my headset, suddenly hyper-aware of how quiet the house was. I looked at the door, half expecting it to swing open, but nothing happened. I stood up and walked to the hallway, listening hard. Nothing. Then I moved to the top of the stairs. And that's when I saw it. A shadow. It moved near the bottom of the staircase, fast and smooth. And then it stopped, like it saw me. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. After what felt like forever, the shadow moved again. I heard the faint sound of footsteps moving toward the back of the house, and then the back door opened, and quietly closed. I ran to my parents' room and called 911 from the landline. Police arrived quickly, but things only got more confusing. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door was locked by the time they arrived. It's possible the intruder picked the lock, or maybe they slipped in hours earlier, when I'd ignored that knock. Looking back, that's what haunts me most, the time I went downstairs for breakfast. He may have been in the house then, hiding in another room, watching me. Whatever his plan was, he never acted on it. But I'll never forget the feeling that I was being watched. I've never felt safe in that house since. Back in 2015, I worked the night shift at a gas station. Most nights were dead quiet, just me, the hum of the freezer, and the occasional tired driver. But then there was Dean, the overly friendly trucker who started showing up way too often. He introduced himself one night while buying coffee. Said he was a long-haul trucker, passed through town regularly. At first, he seemed normal, polite even. But after a few visits, I noticed something about him. He smiled too much. Even in the middle of the night, even when nobody else was around, just this wide, constant grin. Something about it never sat right with me. It wasn't warm or friendly. It was forced, off. But I chalked it up to him just being a quirky guy. That is, until one night, everything about him changed. He came in like usual, greeted me, but there was something off. No cheerful tone, no idle banter. As he moved through the aisles, I watched his face. It was dull, almost angry. He grabbed an energy drink and walked up to the counter. And just like flipping a switch, his expression shifted back into that overly happy grin. But his eyes, they looked hollow. Like something was tearing him apart inside, even as he smiled. He paid, nodded politely, and walked back out to his truck. I forgot about it until the next night, when he returned. Snow was falling pretty heavily, and his truck pulled into the far side of the lot. This time, when he came in, he didn't fake the smile. His expression was blank dead. He grabbed the first drink he saw, came up to the counter, and started asking me questions. "How busy is it tonight? "What time do you get off?" I answered vaguely, keeping it short. Something in me was telling me to stay on guard. But when he asked for help with something in his truck, I hesitated. I'd known him for months. Sure, he was strange, but never threatening. I figured it was just a favor. I threw on my jacket and followed him out. The gas station lot was empty. Just me, him, and his big white box truck parked in the corner. He opened the passenger door, then walked around and climbed into the driver's side. "It's just up here," he said, motioning toward the back of the cab. "You can hop in. I'll follow you in." I stepped up into the truck, sat in the seat, and instantly regretted it. The cab had one of those sliding doors behind the seats, leading into the cargo area. Dean was still smiling, too wide, eyes fixed on me. "It's just right in there," he repeated, still smiling. "Go ahead." Something was wrong. Very wrong. Then I noticed it, an awful smell. Foul, sour, and thick, leaking from behind that door. My instincts kicked in like a jolt of electricity. I jumped down out of the truck, slammed the door shut, and rushed back across the lot. As I hurried away, I heard him yell, not words, just a frustrated, angry scream, muffled by the wind. Back inside the store, I watched through the window as his truck pulled out and disappeared into the snow. Dean never came back. Not that night. Not ever again. I don't know what was in the back of that truck. I don't want to. But every now and then I still wonder, what would have happened if I'd opened that door? Driving cross-country in December probably wasn't the smartest decision, but I had to get home for Christmas, and flying wasn't an option with my little dog, Buster. The road was long and quiet. Too quiet. The first half of the trip was smooth. Clear skies, no delays. But by day 2, the snow had started, heavy and fast. I packed up quickly, hoping I could outrun the storm. I couldn't. By afternoon, I knew I wasn't going to make it to my family's place that night. I needed to find somewhere to crash. The road I was on was long, empty, and almost eerily isolated. Every now and then, I'd pass a gas station, but no motels, no towns. So when I saw a small roadside sign advertising a motel, I took the exit immediately. The motel looked like something out of a forgotten movie, old, rundown, and mostly dark. A single other car sat in the lot. I left the engine running for Buster and stepped out into the storm, heading toward the entrance. The door wouldn't budge. I wiped the fog from the window and leaned in to look. The place looked abandoned. No lights. No movement. I was about to head back to the car when I heard Buster barking. I turned. 2 men were walking past my car, straight toward me. Something about the way they moved set off every alarm in my head. They weren't rushing, but they weren't casual either, like they'd already decided what was going to happen. I tried to walk back to my car, but they moved to block me. "Hey, was the place open?" one asked. "No," I said, trying to stay calm. "I think it's closed." "Oh, that's a shame," the other one chimed in. "Think you could help us? We're having car trouble. Maybe spare a little gas?" They weren't asking. They were stalling, throwing out any excuse to keep me engaged. I mumbled a quick, "sorry," and made a wide loop around them, but even then, they tried to cut me off again. I picked up the pace, practically jogging to the car. Their footsteps crunched behind me, fast. I jumped in, locked the doors, and Buster was losing it in the passenger seat. One of them knocked hard on my window, still pretending to need help. I didn't say a word. I threw it in reverse, spun out onto the main road, and got the hell out of there. About 10 minutes later, my hands still shaking, I called 911 and reported what happened. Roughly 20 minutes after that, an officer called me back. "They're gone," he said. "No car, no men. Whole place is empty now." That's when it really hit me. If their car worked well enough to leave, then what were they doing pretending it didn't? And why were they waiting outside a dead motel, out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a snowstorm? It wasn't about gas. It wasn't about help. It was about me. If I hadn't moved fast, If I hadn't listened to my gut, I'm not sure anyone would have ever found out what happened. I ended up sleeping in my car that night, parked in a well-lit gas station an hour away, with Buster curled up in my lap. I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd see those two guys' faces, hear the knock on the window, feel the cold dread creeping in again. The next morning, I called the motel one more time. Not the number on Google, that was disconnected, but a smaller number I found buried in an old forum post about roadside motels along that stretch of highway. A woman answered. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't spoken in days. Hello? Hi, I was just calling about a motel off Route 86. I stopped there last night but it seemed closed. Do you still operate? There was a long pause. Then softly. We haven't taken guests since 2017. I blinked. I saw a sign for it just yesterday. Another pause. That sign was supposed to be taken down years ago. You said you were there? Did you see anyone? I hesitated. Yeah. 2 men. They said their car broke down. The woman exhaled hard. I thought I heard something, a voice, or maybe a radio, in the background. They're still out there, she whispered. Every couple years, someone reports something similar. A closed motel. 2 men looking for help. I froze. Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long time, and eventually just started the car and drove the rest of the way to my family's house. It's been over a year since that night. I've searched for that motel again a few times out of curiosity, even tried mapping it. Nothing shows up. No sign. No building. No trace of it ever being there. But 2 weeks ago, a coworker of mine was talking about a winter road trip she was planning, and she mentioned a weird old motel her GPS showed as a rest stop along the highway. She asked if I'd ever heard of it. I told her no. And now I keep wondering. If I were to go back there, really go back, would the motel still be waiting? Would they? And what would have happened if I just stepped inside?